So gardening is all about adapting to change, which means that we're gonna have to adapt to the weather. And these rosemary plants have done the exact same thing. They have a ton of new growth on it, even though we are in the middle of December. So about a month ago, I gave both of these plants, this one here, and then that one over there, I gave both of these plants haircuts, meaning that they had very few new growth on it for winter, and I expected them to die back a little bit. But you can see, since it's been so warm here, all of the places where I cut them is complete brand new growth. Which means that I am going to take advantage, because as a gardener you have to adapt to when the weather is giving you signs and deciding it's going to do something of its own. I'm going to cut up all of these new growth on the rosemary plants and use them for one of my landscaping projects for the dream house. Basically, because it's been so hot outside, a lot of the cool weather vegetables that I've planted have not been doing so well. It's been like in the 80s or 90s, and these are radishes. I think they're pink beauty radishes, and they have not been growing as fast as they should be. All right, you can see they barely have even bulbs on them. They have a lot of green leaves, but because it's been so hot outside, it hasn't really given them a chance to develop properly. And they're kind of stringy. You can see, especially over here, they're still kind of stringy. But at the same time, you can see that these little basil seeds that were in an old container have now decided they're going to come to life. Now, this is an old container that I had, and I had thrown a whole bunch of these little basil seeds in here, not thinking that they were going to grow because it had been so long and the temperature was cooling down quite a bit, so I didn't expect them to germinate. And so I reused this container to plant out one of my pups from my from one of my snake plants, right? So these grow like little pups that come up on the side, and so I'll separate them. This was one of them, and I put it in here. Now, because the temperature has come up so much, we have new little basil plants sprouting. Alright, so let me give you some context. This is definitely a project I didn't think I was going to be able to start until spring of next year, when there was tons of new growth on my rosemary plants like there is right now. So because you see all of these stems, that they're bright green, right? You don't have that like brown woody growth. Every single one of them has at least 4 or 5 inches of brand new growth. I'm going to go ahead and take them and strip them down and take advantage of all of that bright green new growth so that I can propagate these out. And then these are going to go at the entrance of the house, of the dream house. They're going to go wherever it is that I can fit in rosemary bushes for the food forest, and wherever else I want to plant my rosemary out. Okay, so that is much better. You see how they're kind of like submerged from there up until where the little leaves start. So that will start growing some roots out, hopefully, since the weather has been very warm. And then if the temperature does drop at all, then I'm gonna go ahead and open up my little greenhouse that I have, and maybe just, try to warm them up. But so far, that doesn't look like it's gonna happen anytime soon, unfortunately, for my radishes and my carrots. We'll see. And look at that. You see all these tiny little new, right? These little miniature baby leaves in between the longer ones. That's exactly what you're looking for if you're going to propagate, because you want to propagate with the green stems and not like the woody stems, which are a little bit older and browner and that kind of thing. So in order to save money on landscaping costs when we're building our dream homestead out, we are planning on actually taking some of these snake plants that I have here in front of me, and some of these rosemary plants once they get nice and big and bushy, and just giving them to the landscaper, because in the construction plans they've allocated a lot of money towards landscaping, and I figured if we can reduce some of that by growing our own plants, propagating them out ourselves, and just making sure that they are actually organic plants, then we won't have to, number one, spend a whole lot of money on landscaping, and I happen to love rosemary in landscapes anyway, so that'll be a win. But then also we won't have to worry about like, oh, where did those, plants come from? Have they been using pesticides? Because that's something that I really want to avoid. A lot of, builders and a lot of landscapers and all of that, generally speaking, they use a lot of pesticides and a lot of non-organic fertilizers and that sort of thing in order to maintain the look of the garden or the lawn or whatever. So that is something I want to make sure that we can integrate into our house plans. And so because I'm also only taking the top leaves off of this, right, all of this is going to end up just kind of in this little bucket here. And so what I'm going to do with this, once I finish with all of them, is I'm going to take all of these, right, we have a whole bunch that needs to come off, and so I'm going to end up making herb bombs with these so that nothing goes to waste. And then I might also take some of them and feed them to the chickens, depending on how many herb bombs we have, because we still have tons of herb bombs from when I made that herb bomb video, and from when we preserved from the old garden as well. So I feel like a lot of times, a lot of gardeners, beginner gardeners, advanced gardeners, myself included, we get stuck in this little pattern of like, oh, well, these are the type of things you grow in fall, or these are the type of things you grow in spring, or these are summer crops, or these are winter crops, or whatever it is. But one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is that plants don't really adapt to that schedule, right? Like, they don't adhere to that schedule. Plants know, well, it's warm outside, time to blossom, or time to bolt, or time to grow a whole bunch of new green growth, right? They don't realize like, oh, well, it's the middle of December and it's supposed to be chilly outside, so I'm not going to go ahead and grow this new green growth. That's not something that plants live by, right? That is something that we people live by. So when it comes to actually gardening, looking for signs of new growth, looking for signs of pest or disease or resistance to those things, or whatever it is one of the ways that we can adapt to becoming better gardeners, essentially. And it's definitely one of the ways that I have been able to expand and just like work with nature instead of working against it. It's definitely made a big impact on my garden. Alright, so this is pretty much what we're looking for. We have a whole bunch of stalks in there. That part is in water, and then the green ones are out of water. So then eventually what will happen is these will grow a whole bunch of little roots, and then you can take them, once they have a pretty established set of roots, you can take them apart and plant them out, and they'll continue to grow like that. But you want to make sure also that if you are leaving this for a couple weeks, which is what it's going to take, you're going to have to leave this in a sunny spot, and you're going to have to maybe refill the water in here as the water gets lower. Alright, so the rest here, these little stalks that didn't quite make it, is going into our compost bin over here. This is the side that still is in the middle of composting all the stuff in here. I'll just toss those out, and we'll go make some herb bombs with the rosemary. And as far as other plants adapting, this is actually one of my new favorite plants in the garden. If you can't tell what it is, that's okay, because basically it's just two little cuttings right now. When I got a lot of my fruit trees from the food forest, there was this really nice lady who happened to have some chaya. This is tree spinach, and I was looking for like an entire plant worth of it, but she actually didn't have it, so she took one of her personal plants and did some cuttings for me, and it had absolutely no new green growth at the time. But since it's been so warm outside, you can see it is starting to have a little bit. Even this one back here, I don't think you can see that, but like a tiny, tiny little speck of new green growth. So then once these actually get nice and big, I'm going to plant them in the food forest, and then I can take my own cuttings from these. So this will live right there, along with all of our other landscaping projects. I feel like the crazy plant lady right now. Okay, so I actually decided that with all of this rosemary, which is already stripped, I'm gonna go ahead and make rosemary salt instead of rosemary herb bombs, just because I have tons and tons of rosemary herb bombs still. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this because the holidays are coming and it would be great to cook with. So I have a little garlic clove. I don't like to add too much into it, and I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the food processor. So I added in maybe like 2 handfuls or so. I still have tons of rosemary over there, which I'll have to figure out what to do with, but I'm only gonna do about this much salt because that is all of the pink salt that I have left, and I like doing this with pink salt. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this all in, and then maybe add some rosemary if it needs more. Next I have my garlic already peeled. And if you're wondering why my food processor is like that orange color, it is because I like to do sweet potato in here and it has permanently stained it. So then I'll put the lid on it and then just continue to pulse it. Whoop. Whoops, that went way before I was ready. I'm gonna make sure that this is on here first. And then, and I'll do this repeatedly until it's kind of all ground up. Alright, so then I'm going to take the rosemary and just pour it into an airtight container. And guys, this smells so amazing. It's like a hint of garlic, tons of rosemary, and it just smells fresh. Now, if you really wanted to, you could even use this to exfoliate when you take a shower, but for the most part, I think I'm gonna just stick to cooking with this. And there you go, homemade rosemary salt. So then I'll just cover this up and I'll leave it in the fridge for the next couple weeks. I'm sure we'll go through all of this with all of the cooking that we are going to do, but that's ready to go. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, guys, while we took advantage of all the changes in the weather and the garden, making impromptu rosemary salt and also doing some garden projects that we hadn't had planned until next year, but definitely glad to get it checked off. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!